This is the Keen Observer Deadeye build that I came out with more than 2 years ago, and I wanted to make a video updating it because there have been a lot of changes to the game since then, and I've adapted it to world versus world roaming. And in world versus world roaming, you're going to have situations where it's more beneficial to play Daredevil, right? Because you have a lot more self-survivability and mobility. But this build is still very strong, has a lot of mobility, and it does have the potential for more sustain if you really want that. So let's just go over the build and talk about how I've optimized it and what the traits are. So first of all, it's critical strikes, trickery, and deadeye. The crit strikes trait line is a massive damage boost because you just gain so much ferocity from the no quarter trait, which gives you 300 ferocity when you have fury, and it gives you a little bit of damage modifiers here and there, some fury uptime, and then it gives you more ferocity here based on your precision, and then you have more crit chance with Keen Observer, and lastly there's Signets of Power. And Signets of Power is a very strong trait because it reduces the cooldown of your signets, and signets on Thief are actually really strong. So Signet of Agility is probably one of the strongest skills on the class besides Shadow Step. You know, most Thief builds have Shadow Step and Signet of Agility. So lowering the cooldown of Signet of Agility gives you more Condi Cleanse because this cleanses 3 conditions, and it gives you an extra dodge. So you want to be using this liberally to, well, as you'll see later, the Deadeye trait lines give you a little bit of aggressive potential with more dodges. And obviously, Signet of the Infiltrator gives you a little bit of initiative gain, which is important, but mostly you're going to be using this for the stun break and the port to target. So because you're a Deadeye, your steel is 1500 range, but it does not port you to the target anymore. So having Infiltrator Signet allows you to chase targets and separate like the steel from the Infiltrator's Signet, right? Because on a Thief, you don't always want to steal boons when you want to port to the target. So it is kind of nice to have Deadeye's Mark and Infiltrator Signet and be able to choose when you want to port in and when you want to steal to someone. But obviously, you're having to use up a utility slot for that, so that's a trade-off there. But it is super good for choosing when you want to fight as well, because Deadeyes have issues with disengaging from fights if they don't have permanent stealth, and this is a build that I tried really hard not to go into, Shadow Arts playstyle with, because first of all, that's not really that fun, and second of all, I feel it's more interactive for and more like fast pace to go into like a more crit strikes variant. And Infiltrator Signet really plays into that because you can chase targets and do burst combos when people aren't expecting them. You can use Infiltrator Signet to juke people by porting to targets that are away from you and get away and out of combat in combination with your other ports. So I feel like Infiltrator Signet is just insane. And as I said, it's lower cooldown because of Signet of Power. So 28-second cooldown here and 24-second cooldown there. Those are pretty low and valuable cooldowns. So next is Trickery. You're going to be using normal trickery stuff. You have Thrill of the Crime, Bountiful Theft, and Sleight of Hand. So that's going to reduce the cooldown of your steel, making Deadeye's Mark a 17-second cooldown. And it's going to daze and rip boons. So you steal 2 boons. There's a priority of stability and Aegis if the target has that, and then protection next. So it's that priority there is really good because those are the most defensive boons. It allows you to rip through them and start dealing damage whenever you steal. So Bountiful Theft is really good. and it gives you your vigor uptime. So you need to be landing your steel to get that vigor, which gives you more dodges, which we'll talk about later, why dodges are important, not just for the sake of dodging. And you'll also, because you're ripping stability, your steel will most likely daze the target. Obviously there's blocks that aren't Aegis or stability, so your steel would be blocked by like actual weapon skill blocks, not just Aegis. But for the most part, it's really nice to use Bountiful Theft with this trait because of that. And then you also have Thrill of the Crime, which gives you a little bit more swiftness uptime. You're going to be getting swiftness from your rifle 2 as well, so this allows you, combined with your low steel cooldown and high uptime of swiftness, you can pretty much get permanent swiftness unless you're getting boon ripped here and there. So that's the main reason for that. You also like the Fury uptime, but you're going to have plenty of that from your other traits, and Fury is going to be really important for you to have because whenever you have it, you have Ferocity. So Thrill of the Crime is just kind of nice because it gives you that Fury immediately when you steal. And you also have a bunch of initiative modifiers in Trickery, which is really important. So you have 3 extra initiative, which means you can pool your initiative and do more burst plays rather than always being low on your initiative pool. And that gives you kind of like a resource value, because the more you have access to a resource, the more options you have. So when you're low on initiative, there's less things you can do, and you're sort of like forced to be like kind of like at the back of your resource pool, and it feels really good to have options, and it gives you this playmaking potential on the build, which is, you'll see later, you have a lot of burst potential. And then stealing obviously will give you initiative. Lead attacks is also pretty important. So this build has a lot of initiative on it, we'll see later as well. And the more initiative that you use, the more stacks of lead attacks you'll get. So you'll gain 10 seconds of a lead attacks buff, which will give you 1% damage every initiative you use. And because you're using so much initiative, you're stacking this up, and it can stay pretty high of a uptime to give you a lot more damage, and that just synergizes very well with all the other damage modifiers of the class. And the Deadeye trait line gives you the ability to gain malice whenever you mark a target. So when you use Steel on someone, you mark them, it puts this little animation above their head. They can see that, and whenever you hit the target with a skill that requires initiative, so any of your 2 through 5 skills, you will gain malice, and you can see the malice above your bar here. So with malicious intent, you will gain an extra malice whenever you mark a target or land your sneak attack. So it basically just means that you'll always have 1 extra malice on your target, and that's good for the Maleficent 7 trait, which is whenever you gain maximum malice and it increases the cap of your malice to 7, you will gain 7 initiative, and you'll gain a ton of boons, which increases your sustain a lot and your damage a lot. So malice is a very important mechanic, as you can see in this build. So yeah, when I mark a target, you will mark it for 30 seconds, and during that 30 seconds, attacking the target will give you malice. If you crit, you will gain double malice. So as you can see here, I have 1 malice because of malicious intent. I will use my Rifle 2, which is one of the best malice suppliers for this build, and I crit, so I gain 2 malice. And this build attempts to get 100% crit chance, and while it doesn't always have 100% crit chance, that's because there's a lot of different things like Signet of Agility passive or the Keen Observer passive, which will give you a lot more crit chance than you need sometimes. But you don't always expect to have those. So I try to get 100% crit chance while having Signet of Agility, but not having Keen Observer. And having 100% crit chance means that you will reliably gain 2 malice. So you can play around getting that maximum malice as soon as possible, which is super important because that gives you your sustain, it gives you your damage, and it also allows you to go into stealth. So whenever you have 5 or more malice, your stolen ability will give you stealth. And your stolen ability doesn't need to, you don't need to be targeting the target when you use it. You can just be doing whatever, and as long as you have the stolen ability, you can use it, and it will give you a boon and deal a little bit of damage to the target if they're in range or in line of sight, and give them a condition. And that stealth is very important because it allows you to not only survive, because it's a decent stealth duration. It's like 3 seconds, I think. Yeah. And that's a longer duration than most of your other stealth skills. So it's a decent amount of time that allows you to land your Death's Judgment. And your Death's Judgment is your stealth attack, which uses your malice. So whenever you get to maximum malice, or really at any time, you can use your Death's Judgment for added effect. So as you can see here on the tooltip, Death's Judgment reveals yourself. So when I'm in stealth, you can see I'll reveal myself just by casting Death's Judgment, and it creates a big tell for the enemy, but it also does a lot of damage if it can land, and it will do pretty decent base damage, but then it will stack modifier of 15% more damage per malice that I have. And with Maleficent 7, that goes up to 7, so you can do like, what is that, 105% more damage on your Death's Judgment when you have full malice. So that'll deal pretty much double damage, and then that will use up all of your malice and allow you to gain more malice to gain Maleficent 7 back. So in a way, landing your Death's Judgment is not only an aggressive thing because you want to be dealing damage, obviously, but it allows you to reset your malice, which allows you to get it back to full again, which allows you to proc Maleficent 7, which allows you to get more initiative, which allows you to proc more initiative, gaining malice. So yeah, it's like a vicious cycle. So generally what you'll do is you'll mark the target, and then depending on the situation, you have 2 things you can do. You can use your Rifle 2, which is very quick. You can just spam that out. 3 hits, and if they all crit, you get maximum malice right there. You get protection, you get might, you get regen, you get all these nice boons and vigor. And then, because of Silent Scope, whenever you dodge, you will go into stealth for 1 second. It's a very short duration, but it gives you enough time to use your sneak attack. And if it lands, when obviously my Deadeye's mark ran out, so I lost all my malice, but if it lands, you will use up your malice, and then you can start over and do it again, and just do that. And whenever you kill a target, you will also reset your Deadeye's mark, which is pretty nice because it allows you to scroll through targets very quickly when you're outnumbering and such like that, and to get kills and to chain them very quickly. So you want to make sure that you finish your targets off for sure. And then yeah, you have pretty much the combo is you steal to the target. If that lands, you have your stolen ability. You use 3 Rifle 2s, and then you use your F2 or whatever the keybind for that is for you, and that'll give you stealth. And then you use your auto attack, which becomes the sneak attack, which is Death's Judgment, and then you land your malice, and you kind of repeat. You won't have the stolen ability all the time, so you'll have to resort to dodging for your Death's Judgment sometimes. And that's pretty much the basic rotation. There are some situations where you want to use your Rifle 3. However, that's only when you're kneeling. So on your rifle, your 5 skill will give you the kneel effect, and when you kneel, it increases the velocity of your all of your rifle skills, so it makes them faster and harder to predict, but it will also increase their range. So if you're in a situation where the enemy is like kind of out of range of you, you can just kneel and start using your rifle abilities, and your rifle 3 while kneeling is really strong. So while you're standing, it only shoots twice, and while you're kneeling, it shoots 3 times, in addition to having longer range and faster velocity. So it's a very strong skill to use while you're kneeling. However, it is 6 initiative. So skirmisher shot is 2 initiative while you're not kneeling, and it will cripple and give you swiftness. Very valuable, low investment skill to use. So that's why I like to use that mostly. But when you're kneeling, your rifle 2 is like a slow, low damage immobilize. And while immobilize is good, you're not really trading with an enemy that well unless they're unable to interact with you because they're immobilized. Obviously in a 1v1 situation it's fine, but if you're in a 1v2, just immobilizing one player isn't going to do anything because the other is just going to free cast on you because you're kneeling, right? When you kneel, you are not able to walk. You can only dodge. So you generally don't use the immobilized shot because it's too low tempo. You need a faster ability. So the rifle 3 is good because it does damage really quickly, and the rifle 2 is better than the rifle 3 while you're standing because it doesn't really do that much damage. Obviously the 2, as you can see there, did comparable damage, and it was half the initiative. So half the initiative for almost the same damage, and then instead of just giving you 2 might, it will give you cripple on the target and swiftness on yourself, which is important because cripple allows you to stick to the target and swiftness allows you to do the same. Another thing is your skirmisher shot actually pierces and double tap doesn't. So while double tap hits twice, which means it's not as counterplayable by Aegis, skirmisher shot can just be casted twice and use the same amount of initiative. So you do want to use skirmisher shot, and obviously the piercing is really good for like Zerg situations because you don't get body blocked. So yeah, the 2 skill is really good, but that's kind of how malice works, right? And how you want to gain malice. And you also have silent scope, giving you a lot of precision while you're in your rifle. So that's pretty nice. Precision, as we know, gives you more ferocity, so I have a lot of precision on this build. Gives me more damage. And there is a variant to this build that you can run. You can go with invigorating precision, and because you have so much fury uptime already, you don't really need the fury from no quarter. The ferocity loss is pretty huge though. Like for example, if I look right now, my ferocity is it would be 235 with fury. So if I don't have that, then it's 215. So I gain 20 crit damage when I have fury with no quarter. So that's 20% damage pretty much always, right? Because I have 100% crit chance. And obviously there's like weakness and Stoneheart or balance stance, which can make you not crit, but for the most part you are going to be critting all the time. However, invigorating precision gives you 20% of the damage that you deal as healing back. And since this build is already very aggressively oriented, and say for example I hit the target here with my skirmisher shot, that did 2k to a level 81 camp supervisor. So every time I land my 2k skirmisher shot, that's healing me for 400 health. So that can add up quite a bit over time, especially because this build can do a lot of burst, right? So yeah, that is pretty good for sustain. I like to use no quarter because it gives you a little bit more burst, but both are fine. So yeah, that's the other variant. And let's go into the equipment. So I use, it's a little bit of theorycraft to get to 100% crit chance here. As you can see, I am a little bit over the crit cap. It's fine if you have a little bit over, but yeah, when you have Fury, you want to be at crit cap. And obviously, if I use my Signet of Agility, I'll be under the crit cap. But if I have Keen Observer, which means I'm above 90% HP, I'll be over it again. So I kind of just play around having the crit cap when I have Signet of Agility up, and not having the Keen Observer buff, because you're gonna get damaged. But yeah, generally you're gonna have pretty much 100%. Even when you don't have both of these, you'll have 92% crit chance. So you can rely on critting all the time, which, as I said, was important for getting your Malice reliably, because the Malice is the whole idea of the build. So having your crit chance optimized like this is very important. So how I get that is using a mix of Marauders gear, Berserker gear, and the Pack Rune. So the Pack Rune gives you power, boon duration, and the 6 bonus gives you precision. It's like 125 precision, so it helps you cap out on it very easily without going into like assassin stats, which can be a little bit of a waste. So you want to have Marauders as your main stat. So I have Marauders pretty much everywhere on my trinkets. And then I have a Berserker rifle, and I have a Berserker, yeah, my Berserker weapons. And then I have a mix of Marauders and Soldiers gear. So there is a little bit of a choice here. So I take my headpiece as Soldier and my gloves as Soldier, and that makes it so that I don't overcap on precision too much. And it also gives you a little bit of survivability. Now, the difference between Soldiers and Valkyrie is that you gain toughness and you lose ferocity, right? So you can go for Valkyrie instead of 2 Soldiers pieces, but I find that this build doesn't really need more damage, especially when you're going for the no quarter variant. So I go for a little bit of toughness because it just gives you a little bit more survivability, and yeah, you still have all the power that you need for the build. So you're still capped on crit, you still have as much power as you can get, and you're getting a little bit of toughness here. So, and then the vitality from Marauders is pretty important because, you know, you don't want to be too squishy. So that's kind of how I set my stats up, just mainly Marauders, Berserker weapons, and then Soldiers, gloves, and head. But you can just do whatever you want to figure out how you want to get your crit cap. You can also use infusions if you really want to increase your crit chance if you're like slightly below the cap. But I found that this is the best combination for me in using power infusions. But the pack runes are also really good for giving you your fury uptime. So whenever you steal, you will gain your thrill of the crime, right? And that'll give you your fury duration, and so will no quarter. But sometimes, yeah, you can lose it, or sometimes you are entering a fight and you don't want to immediately steal. So pack runes will give you your fury pretty much whenever you enter a fight, and then from that point on, when you have your fury, just critting will give you your fury duration and uptime from no quarter. So I like that, and it also gives you some swiftness, which this build doesn't really have too much of it. You obviously get swiftness from your 2 skill on both weapons, but you also want to give yourself a little bit more to supplement that, so that you've pretty much got permanent fury, and swiftness. And then you also gain boon duration. So I have 15% boon duration. This build gains quite a bit of quickness from the sigils, which the boon duration can increase slightly. And just in general, you get tons of boons from Maleficent 7, and you want to be having that boon duration. So that's why I like Pack Rune. It's just the best for this build. Scholar is kind of okay, but you're not going to be really be gaining too much of a benefit when you're outnumbering from scholars. So I find that the pack runes are just better in more diverse situations. And then on the rifle, I have Sigil of Rage and Air. Air just gives you a little bit of a DPS supplement, and Rage gives you quickness whenever you crit a foe. So pretty much whenever you start hitting someone, you're going to be having quickness. It has a 20-second cooldown, but because you have pretty much 100% crit chance, it's going to proc immediately, and that'll allow you to do your burst very quickly. So I'll do my steal, right? That'll give me the fury and stuff, and then I use my first rifle 2, that gives me the quickness, and then I can immediately do my other rifle 2s right after. And by the time I do my full burst, the quickness is gone, but it allows you to do your full like initial burst in the duration of that quickness. So if like a target isn't dodging you, they're going to take quite a bit of damage at the start. So as you can see here, I just do it, and then I do the burst, and it does so much damage at the start, and it smooths out your fight very quickly, because as soon as your damage gets rolling and you've got your Maleficent 7 rolling, you're kind of feeling good. And then also on my sword pistol, so that's kind of like the secondary weapon set, you're not really using the sword pistol too often, and we'll go over the skills of the sword pistol later. But basically, you have a lot of CC on this set, and because of that, I have Sigil of Absorption and Sigil of Celerity. So whenever you disable a foe, not even interrupt, you'll gain 5 seconds of quickness, and that's a pretty long duration. And usually it synergizes really well with Pistol Whip, because as soon as you hit them with the stun, you have the quickness, and then your flurry happens, which does tons of damage. But because you have quickness, you basically land your full flurry into the stun. So it's just really good synergy with Pistol Whip to have the Celerity Sigil. And Absorption will give you a little bit of Boon Rip on top of your Steel. So these two sigils have pretty long cooldowns, and the reason why that works really well with this build is because you generally are in the rifle the whole time, and then like a situation will occur where it's like, okay, I need to actually use my sword here, and then you have a massive power momentum spike when you go into the sword, because you gain that quickness, you steal the boons when you're interrupting, and the cooldowns don't really matter because you leave the pistol, the sword pistol set very quickly, and those cooldowns don't really matter anymore afterwards. So you gain your massive power spike, and then you leave and go back to rifle, where you want to be doing your normal like air sigil procking and DPS rotation. Some of the skills that I haven't gone over yet include the Rifle 4, Death's Retreat. This will port you directly away from the target. It does a little bit of a poison and damage effect, so you can actually gain Malice if this crits, which it can crit very easily. So that's kind of nice to delay the Death's Retreat, because you don't need to use one of your attacks to get Malice if you're going to be using Death's Retreat on top of them. And if you don't have a target, you can actually use this skill to maintain and control your positioning very precisely. So you want to use the free camera option under camera. So you enable free camera, and that allows you to use your left click to move your camera independently of the way that your character is facing. And then you want to find the about face keybind and keybind that to something that's convenient for you. And what you do is you hold the left click and you move the camera into the direction that you want to basically port towards. So say I'm moving this way, but I want to immediately start porting into this direction eventually. So my camera is facing that way, and about face will always move your character to face the opposite way that your camera is facing. So I just pressed about face, and then because Death's Retreat makes you go backwards, it'll actually make you move towards your camera rather than, or sorry, away from your camera rather than towards it. So you just left click and then about face and then press 4, and about face, press 4, and about, you know. So it's all about having good control of your camera, and you can do this to escape from fights that you don't necessarily have targets on, or when like the target isn't in a perfect, because like it's not in a perfect line of the way you want to go. Like say I'm standing right here but I want to be going in this direction. Well, I can't port away from the target, right? You want to de-target and then port away from them that direction. So that's a really important trick to learn, and it's also useful for withdrawal, right? That's a roll skill, so you can use that as well. While you're kneeling though, you will use Sniper's Cover, which is a 5-second duration smoke field. It only blocks projectiles, it doesn't give blind, but this is actually pretty good versus rangers because you can not only block their attacks, but you can also use your physical projectiles to get blind through that wall. So it is kind of nice to precast that into like a ranger, or even versus like thieves. You can just precast it and then you'll use your skirmisher shot to trade with them, because every time you attack you will be blinding with it. Obviously some of your attacks are 20% chances to give a projectile, but your 2 skill will be 100% and your Death's Judgment will be 100%. So yeah, using those will give you the 100% blind projectile, which will help you to trade with things a lot better. And then you're going to have the sword pistol set. Sword is really strong because it gives you mobility. So mainly why I use a sword is for the Infiltrator Strike. This is a 900 range port to the target, which immobilizes, gives you swiftness, and then you can port back when there's like a 15-second duration to the actual buff, and you can port back and it will cleanse a condition when you port back. And this is really strong for giving you an aggressive opener while also giving you like an out. So say for example there's a target over here. What I can do is, I'm not in combat, I can use sword 2, port in, swap to rifle, and then use my burst combo and say that they're about to attack me again. I still have my weapon swap off cooldown because I swapped out of combat, and now I can port back to my original location. And even if I do go in combat, you have 15 seconds, so weapon swap isn't that long. So you have like 5 seconds after you swap to return back to your original location. And yeah, it's just a really strong ability, and combined with Shadow Step, you can really create distance between yourself and the enemy. So say for example I'm being chased by this Warclaw. I can port away with the Shadow Step, but they might still be able to catch up to me. So what I'll do is I'll use Shadow or Infiltrator Strike to a target as well, and you have to remember the order, right? So I use Shadow Step first and Infiltrator second, so then when I return I need to do it in reverse order, and Infiltrator first and then Shadow Step second. And if they chase me all the way over there, I can do a double back and, you know, go the opposite direction. And you can juke a lot of people very easily, bait out cooldowns, and then at this point you can even create distance for your rifle to burst people. So yeah, it's really good. And you have Pistol Whip. This is your main damage. It's just a half-second stun, which we already know will give you a Celerity Sigil proc. And yeah, it can do lots of damage, and it's really good for cleaving down bodies. This build is mostly single target, and this is kind of like the only way for you to do AoE damage. So it's just mainly useful for the damage, and it's a little bit safe because you're in an evade frame while doing it, but it is pretty clunky, so I wouldn't rely on it too much. You should just use positioning with the Infiltrator Strike, or Death Retreat to really peel for yourself. This is more of an aggressive skill. And Headshot, not too useful, but it can give you your Malice very easily because it's a ranged attack. So say for example you don't have enough initiative to do your Pistol Whip, but you do have enough for a Headshot and you have, you know, enough Malice to get it next time. You can do like a Headshot and then you'll get your Malice full, and then that'll feed you more initiative, which will give you a lot more options. So yeah, Headshot is pretty good, other than just its normal use of interrupting things. Black Powder is kind of okay. You're usually not standing in it, but it's okay. Like, you already have the Sniper's cover to give you the blind field for your Death Retreat. So if you want to do a combo like blind into a leap finisher with your Death Retreat, you can get stealth that way, but that is pretty costly. So Sniper's cover is actually 4 initiative rather than 6 initiative of your Black Powder, so it's a lot less costly to do this combo instead. But this one doesn't blind, so the other one will give you a little bit more self peel, and that one will give you a little bit more initiative. But those are the main skills. And you also have Dagger Storm I didn't really talk about. There's really only one other choice that you can take instead of Dagger Storm, and that's the Shadow Meld, but I feel like that one isn't that important. If you're going against Sycam Rangers, it's not like you're going in stealth that often with this build anyways, so the best way to deal with that is Dagger Storm anyways, or just using Sniper's cover. And Dagger Storm allows you to fill the gap in between your initiative rotations. There's a couple of tricks that you can learn as well. So whenever you're in stealth and you use Death's Judgment, you can actually precast an attack into the Death's Judgment, because the Death's Judgment will reveal you, right? But the attack before it won't reveal you until you hit the target. So say for example I'm at full Malice, or maybe I'm not at full Malice, and I know that I have to dodge right here. So at this point I don't want to use my Death's Judgment even though I'm in stealth, because I want to get the value off of my Maleficent 7, but I needed to dodge there for whatever reason. So I'm in stealth and I want to land my Death's Judgment, but I also want to get my maximum Malice for the Maleficent 7. So what you can do in that situation is, so say I'm right there, I dodge, I press 2, and then I press 1, and it precasts the 2 skill into the 1, and the 2 lands after the 1 is starting to cast, so it's basically allowing you to get both. And that's just really good for understanding the tempo of your build. And you can also just use it in general, like when you have 0 Malice anyways. So like say I'm in stealth and I have no Malice and my Deadeye's Mark is coming off cooldown, you can just use your Deadeye Mark into the Death's Judgment. So kind of hard because I don't have much stealth uptime, but yeah, you use the mark and you can see the days happen, and then I immediately use my Death's Judgment into that, and that allows you to fit in more animations into a smaller amount of time, which is important to this build because it's a very high tempo build. In this scenario, I am aggressing a 1v2 versus a Core Necro and a Condi Herald. This is a bit dangerous because there's a lot of Condi output, and my build, while it does have decent Condi cleanse, it's not really high sustained Condi cleanse. So I have to be careful. I do have my heal skill, which will remove Torment, and my Signet. And in these kind of 1v2 situations, as you can see, securing the stomp with the Shadow Step is super important. So you want to use Shadow Step only to secure that. And if you have to use it defensively or to survive or stall or something like that, it kind of like prevents you from getting a kill. So you often want to save your Shadow Step in those situations just to get the stomp. And now that I'm in a even 1v1, I can use my Shadow Step whenever. The Condi Rev does land a couple torment skills on me, and as you can see, I have to stand still for a bit or I'm gonna die. And I pop off a couple Condi cleanses with my Death Retreat, and I use the Shadow Step there to cleanse and reposition, but I have like nothing at this point. This is a really tanky Condi Rev. They're using the Retribution trait line, and at this point the Necro is already coming back, so I use my Sword 2 and my Infiltrator's Signet to get away from the Condi Rev, and I abuse ports with my Sword 2 here, and that helps me to survive by using a secondary target. And I actually get the Necro down again by reflecting their Lich form, but I don't have Shadow Step here. So this makes the situation a little bit dangerous because I can't really get the stomp. But luckily the Revenant chooses to chase me instead of rezzing, and that means I can separate them because I can use my sword port to go in and out from the Necro's body and create distance from myself and the Rev. And at some point I know that the Necro has used their fear, so I can just go for a stomp after I've created some distance and allow myself to isolate the Revenant now. And at this point I'm feeling pretty good because I have like full initiative, so I can cleanse myself, and the Rev is around half HP, so we're doing pretty good. I land a full double pistol whip on the Rev, but it only does 6,000 damage. So I am in a pretty bad state here. I'm spamming my Sword 2 to cleanse conditions, and I actually get very lucky that it removes the torment there. And I actually get out of combat here, and the Rev is also going to reset here. So we do a little bit of a reset on the 1v1, but it benefits me pretty well because I had basically no cooldowns. And now the 1v1 is a little bit more fair because it starts out being a 1v1, and I'm able to just create distance between me and the Rev because this is a more open field area. Open field is pretty good for Deadeyes, and I'm kind of stuck in there with the Dagger Storm because I don't want to move with the Torment until I cleanse it. And I'm doing this thing where I'm like strafing backwards because you have to be facing your target when you attack with the rifle, so you can't really move the maximum distance. So I'm kind of like strafing backwards to attack the target while also kind of moving as fast as I can. The Rev does land a lot of damage on me, so I got to keep kiting, and at this point I'm going to, we reset again here, so it's a little bit dangerous, but I stole a protection there and got a really nice pistol whip off. And yeah, at this point I pretty much have the advantage because the Rev has already used their heal skill, and they can't really do enough damage to finish me off. Builds that are very aggressive are dangerous for me, but builds that are like tanks, that's kind of what the point of a Deadeye is to kill tanks. So the difference between a Daredevil and a Deadeye is the damage difference for sure. So a class like this would actually be more dangerous for a Daredevil because the Daredevil doesn't really have enough damage to finish them off, whereas the Deadeye does. But the Daredevil have to play more riskily to do so, and that gives the Deadeye a little bit of a better advantage in certain matchups. So I'm chasing a Weaver here, and as you can see, the potential to dismount someone is very good with this build because of the Infiltrator Signet and the Rifle Burst. You can get kills on a lot of people who don't want to engage with you, even if you don't land your mount thing. And what I'm doing in this fight is I'm trying to stay at the perfect range. So I kneel at like 1500 range, and they try to go out of my range, but I chase only until I'm within the range of my attacks, but not any further to be in range of their attacks. And obviously I go in for a quick little burst there with the sword, but then I immediately get back out as I know that I don't have too much sustained damage in melee range. I'm just playing around, landing my Maleficent 7, and I precasted a Rifle 2 into my Maleficent 7 there. So that was really big damage. And yeah, I'm just aggressing pretty hard, but I know that they can counter pressure me. So I just keep that, maintain that distance. And yeah, at this point, they're pretty much low. They're out of their barrier cooldowns. There's not really much they can do. So all I need to do is just finish them off, play a little bit safe, and you know, which is what I've been doing the whole time. And then when I know that I can get the kill, secure it. So that's what I'm gonna do. And I want to get the stomp here, but I end up getting interrupted by a ranger using their longbow. So I have to be safe here because the ranger can counter pressure a lot, and they go in stealth here. So I end up having to interrupt the res with the pistol whip spam, and I do have to be safe because I don't have too much in the way of sustain. So what you have to do when cleaving a downstate body like that is you need to target alternating targets with your steel so that you don't necessarily need to remove your malice, because when you target the same target with your steel, you'll just maintain your malice. But if you target something new with your steel, then you will be able to gain your malice again from Maleficent 7. So alternating who you target with your sword is really important for maintaining your Maleficent 7 and keeping your initiative generation going. And this last one I want to show is probably the hardest matchup for you to deal with. It's against a dagger pistol daredevil. The reason it's so hard is because they have more stealth than you, they have more evades than you, and their burst is a little bit more reliable. So they prevent you from landing your Maleficent 7 by forcing you in a situation where you can't land your attacks on something that's in stealth, and then when they do appear and they're targetable, well, they're playing very aggressive on you and then evading. So it's hard to land skills on them. So how you actually land your skills on them is you precast into their Black Powder Heartseeker combos. So when I see them use Black Powder Heartseeker, there's a little bit of a delay after the Heartseeker, right, with an aftercast. So as soon as I see the Black Powder, I kneel and use the Rifle 3. This is important because, as I said before, Rifle 2 is a lot more efficient than Rifle 3, but because there's only a small window of time where you can actually hit them because the evade and the stealth uptime, you're wanting to use the Rifle 3 while kneeling, which is a pretty high tempo skill during that small window of time where you can hit them. And this also will remove blind because it's 3 hits, and it will get a lot of pressure and it'll progress your Maleficent 7 malice. You can also use headshot. That'll prevent them from pressuring you as much, and you can also do a pistol whip if you really feel like it, but that's a very clunky animation that they can just steal into. So in general, you want to precast into their steel so that you can land attacks. Keep distance, because the more distance you keep from them, the more they have to spam their stealth, the more animations that you're going to be able to precast into. And also, if you do land steel on them, your stolen ability will actually blind in stealth. So you can actually peel for yourself by putting blind on them, and you don't even need a target for your stolen ability to land.